The men are on her roof before she has decided what to do with them. 2 Israelite spies, sent by Joshua from the camp at Shittim across the Jordan, have made their way into Jericho, the most fortified city in the region, the gateway to the entire Canaanite interior, and somehow ended up in the house of a woman named Rahab. The text of Joshua chapter 2 does not explain how they found her, or why her house specifically, or what their plan was beyond gathering intelligence about the city and the land. What the text records is that someone reported their presence to the king of Jericho almost immediately, and that Rahab hid them under stalks of flax on her roof before the king's messengers arrived at her door. This is Jericho, approximately 1406 BC, though the precise date depends on which chronology of the Exodus and conquest one follows, and the scholarly debate on this point remains active. What is not in dispute is the strategic significance of the city. Jericho sits at the lowest inhabited point on earth, in the Jordan Valley, controlling the primary eastern approach into the Canaanite hill country. It is the first city any force crossing the Jordan from the east would need to neutralize. It is also, by the time of Joshua's campaign, a city that has heard what is coming. The text makes this explicit. Rahab herself will say it. The fear of the Israelites has fallen on everyone in Jericho. They have heard about the parting of the Red Sea. They have heard about the destruction of the Amorite kings Sihon and Og. The intelligence that the Israelite spies are trying to gather about Jericho is, in a certain sense, already flowing in the opposite direction. The entire city knows that an army is camped across the river, and it knows what that army has done to everyone who stood in its way. Rahab knows this too. She makes a decision before the messengers knock. The text of Joshua chapter 2 identifies her as a prostitute. The Hebrew word zona, which the Greek Septuagint and the New Testament both translate without softening. This detail has generated enormous scholarly and theological discussion over the centuries, including minority readings that suggest zona here means innkeeper rather than prostitute, on the grounds that a house of public lodging would be a logical place for foreign spies to stay anonymously. The majority reading, across Jewish, Christian, and secular scholarship, is that she is what the text says she is, and the text proceeds to treat this as incidental rather than definitive. The messengers tell her to bring out the men. Her response is immediate and completely false. Yes, the men came to me, but I did not know where they had come from. At dusk, when it was time to close the city gate, they left. I don't know which way they went. Go after them quickly. You may catch up with them. She sends the king's men toward the Jordan. They leave, the gates close behind them, and then Rahab goes up to the roof. What happens on the roof of her house in the next few minutes is one of the most compressed and consequential negotiations in the entire Hebrew Bible. 2 men are lying under stalks of flax in a city that is about to be destroyed. A woman who has just committed treason against her own king is standing over them. And the conversation they have, recorded in Joshua chapter 2, verses 9 through 21, contains a theological declaration, a political negotiation, a sworn oath, and a specific set of instructions, all in the space of 13 verses. She speaks first. I know that the Lord has given you this land, and that a great fear of you has fallen on us, so that all who live in this country are melting in fear because of you. This is not small talk. This is a declaration of faith delivered by a Canaanite woman to 2 Israelite spies on a rooftop in the middle of the night. She is not asking whether the God of Israel is powerful. She is stating, as settled fact, that he has already given the Israelites this land. The verb tense matters, not will give, but has given. In her understanding of what is about to happen, the outcome is already determined. And then she says something that the text frames as the reason for her declaration. For the Lord your God is God in heaven above and on the earth below. The theological weight of this sentence is easy to read past. Rahab is a Canaanite. She has grown up in a religious world populated by the gods of the ancient Near East, Baal, Asherah, the local deities whose worship was embedded in the agricultural and political life of every Canaanite city. She is not an Israelite. She has not received the Torah. She has not witnessed the plagues of Egypt or the crossing of the Red Sea firsthand. She has heard about them, and what she has concluded from the reports of what the God of Israel has done: the sea divided, 2 kings destroyed, 40 years of wilderness survival, is that this deity is categorically different from the gods she has always known. Not a local deity with a specific territory and a specific domain. God in heaven above and on the earth below. The formula she uses is one of the most comprehensive monotheistic declarations in the entire Old Testament, and it comes from a Canaanite prostitute on a rooftop in a city that is about to fall. The writer of Joshua does not comment on this, he simply records it. Then she negotiates. Now then, please swear to me by the Lord that you will show kindness to my family, because I have shown kindness to you. Give me a sure sign that you will spare the lives of my father and mother, my brothers and sisters, and all who belong to them, and that you will save us from death. The word she uses for kindness is the Hebrew hesed, one of the most theologically loaded words in the entire Hebrew Bible. It is the word used for God's covenant loyalty to Israel, steadfast love, unfailing kindness. She is not asking for mercy. She is invoking a covenant category, the same category that governs Israel's relationship with its God, and applying it to her own situation. The spies agree. Our lives for your lives. If you don't tell what we are doing, we will treat you kindly and faithfully when the Lord gives us the land. And then the specific instruction: tie a scarlet cord in the window through which you lower us down. Bring your family into your house. Anyone who steps outside your door, we cannot guarantee their safety. Anyone inside, we will protect. She agrees to everything. She lowers them down through the window. Her house is built into the city wall, and they disappear into the darkness toward the hill country, and she ties the scarlet cord in the window. Most people who have read the Rahab story have focused on the cord, the scarlet thread, the detail that is theologically the most loaded. Some readers have connected it to the blood on the doorposts of the Passover, another scarlet marker that distinguished the protected from the unprotected, the saved from the destroyed. But before the cord, there is the lie. Rahab lied to the king's messengers, directly, confidently, without hesitation. And this lie is what the entire story depends on. Without it, the spies are captured, the intelligence mission fails. And so, depending on how one reads the narrative, the entire conquest of Canaan is jeopardized. The lie is not incidental to the story. It is the hinge on which the story turns. The theological tradition has wrestled with this for centuries. Augustine argued that Rahab sinned by lying, though her intention was good. Aquinas agreed. The writer of the New Testament letter to the Hebrews argues something different entirely, listing Rahab in the great catalogue of faith in chapter 11, the same list that includes Abraham, Moses, and David, and citing specifically that she welcomed the spies, not despite the lie. The welcome, which required the lie, is the act of faith being celebrated. The letter of James, chapter 2, goes further still. In the same way, was not even Rahab the prostitute considered righteous for what she did when she gave lodging to the spies and sent them off in a different direction? Righteous for what she did, which included telling the king's messengers that the spies had already left. The text does not resolve this tension, it simply stands in it. If this story is reshaping how you think about who the biblical text calls righteous, send this to someone who has reduced Rahab to a footnote. Her full story is anything but. The spies return to Joshua. Their report is confident. The Lord has surely given the whole land into our hands. All the people are melting in fear because of us. They have gathered less military intelligence than theological confirmation. The decisive information they bring back from Jericho is not about the city's defenses or the size of its garrison. It is Rahab's declaration, the testimony of a Canaanite woman who had concluded from the outside what Israel was still learning from the inside. The Lord has given you this land. The Jordan parts. The entire Israelite nation crosses on dry ground, the same sign that opened the Red Sea 40 years earlier, repeated now for a generation that was not yet born when the first crossing happened. The priests carry the Ark of the Covenant into the river. The water stops flowing, the people cross, the priests come up last, the water returns, and Jericho, watching from behind its walls, sees all of it. Joshua chapter 5 verse 1. When all the Amorite kings west of the Jordan and all the Canaanite kings along the coast heard how the Lord had dried up the Jordan before the Israelites until they had crossed over, their hearts melted and they no longer had the courage to face the Israelites. The city is already defeated before a single soldier approaches the wall. Rahab is in her house waiting. The scarlet cord is in the window. Her family is gathered inside. Her father, her mother, her brothers, everyone she had asked the spies to protect. They are inside the wall of a city that is about to fall, trusting a cord and a promise made by two men she hid under stalks of flax. This is the position she is in for 7 days. The military strategy Joshua receives for the conquest of Jericho is not a military strategy in any conventional sense. March around the city once a day for 6 days. 7 priests carrying 7 trumpets made of ram's horns, walking ahead of the ark. On the 7th day, march around the city 7 times. The priests blow the trumpets, the people shout, and the walls will fall. There is no battering ram in this plan, no siege works, no undermining of the foundations, no diversion of the water supply. The tactic that Cyrus would use against Babylon 9 centuries later. The entire military operation consists of walking in silence for 6 days and then making noise on the 7th. The Israelite army circles Jericho once, returns to camp, circles again, returns, again. 6 days of this. 6 days of an army walking around your walls in silence, with priests and ram's horns and an ark, doing nothing that looks like an attack, saying nothing, threatening nothing visible. 6 days for the people inside the walls to watch and wait and wonder when the actual assault is coming. On the 7th day, they circle 7 times. The trumpets sound. Joshua commands the people to shout and adds one instruction that is not part of the military command. The city and all that is in it are to be devoted to the Lord. Only Rahab, the prostitute, and all who are with her in her house shall be spared, because she hid the men we sent. Her name. In the command to destroy an entire city, one exception, named specifically before a single stone has fallen. The walls fall outward. This detail, which we examined in the archaeological context in an earlier story, appears in the text of Joshua chapter 6 verse 20. The wall collapsed. The Hebrew verb here implies sudden, catastrophic structural failure. Not the kind of collapse you get from sustained battering. The kind you get from something that has no natural explanation. Every soldier advances straight in. The city is destroyed. Subscribe if these stories are doing something to how you read the text. The next one follows a man who defeated an army at the peak of his life and then, 3 days later, asked God to let him die. And then, in Joshua chapter 6, verse 22, Joshua turns to the two spies. "Go into the prostitute's house and bring her out and all who belong to her, in accordance with your oath to her." They go in. They bring out Rahab, her father, her mother, her brothers, everyone she had gathered inside the house. The text records one detail about where they brought them. They brought her out and put her in a place outside the camp of Israel. Outside the camp, not inside. She is safe, the oath has been kept, the scarlet cord has done what it was supposed to do, everyone inside the house is alive, but she is outside the camp. A Canaanite woman in a destroyed Canaanite city, placed at the edge of a community she does not yet belong to. And then the text of Joshua adds one of its most quietly significant lines. "And she lives among the Israelites to this day." She lives among them. Past tense of the Canaanite woman who was outside the camp, present tense of the one who lives among the people whose God she declared before the walls fell. Now here is the moment that changes the entire frame of Rahab's story. The detail that transforms her from a supporting character in the conquest narrative into something the New Testament writers clearly regarded as far more significant. Matthew chapter 1, verse 5. The genealogy of Jesus, the list of fathers and sons that Matthew uses to establish the legal lineage of the Messiah from Abraham through David to Joseph. It is structurally a list of men, which is why the 5 women who appear in it stand out with such force. Rahab is the second of the 5. Salmon, the father of Boaz, whose mother was Rahab. One phrase, embedded in a genealogy, but the phrase is doing enormous work. The woman who was a Canaanite prostitute in Jericho, who hid spies under flax, who lied to the king's messengers, who negotiated her family's survival with a scarlet cord, is listed by Matthew as a direct ancestor of Jesus of Nazareth. Matthew did not have to include her. The genealogy is selective. 42 generations compressed into a list that skips many names while featuring others. He chose to include Rahab. He chose to include her name. And he chose to identify her with the same word the book of Joshua uses, the Greek porn, the same word that gives us the English pornography, the starkest possible translation of what she was. Matthew does not soften it. There is something the New Testament keeps doing with Rahab's story that is worth naming directly before this story closes. The letter to the Hebrews puts her in the hall of faith. James calls her righteous. Matthew puts her in the bloodline of the Messiah. None of these texts require her past to be reinterpreted, minimized, or explained away before she can occupy these positions. The past is present in the record. She is identified by it, not despite it. And the record places her in the hall of faith, in the category of righteousness, in the genealogy of the one the New Testament calls the Savior of the world. What the scarlet cord protected was not just her household. It protected her place in the story. The scarlet cord is still in the window when the walls fall. That is the image the book of Joshua leaves. A red thread in the window of a house built into a collapsing wall, visible from the outside, marking one address in a destroyed city where the terms of a rooftop agreement are still in force. It is a remarkably small object to carry the weight of an entire life. What's striking, and this is where Rahab's story connects to something much larger than the conquest of Canaan, is the specific mechanism by which she ends up in Matthew's genealogy. She did not convert and then act. She acted and then was recognized. The declaration of faith on the rooftop came after the decision to hide the spies. The negotiation for her family's safety came after the lie to the king's messengers. The scarlet cord went in the window after the oath was made, but the oath was made because of something she had already done before anyone asked her to do anything. She moved first, without a community of faith to belong to, without a Torah to guide her. without a priest or a prophet or any institutional structure that would have recognized what she was doing as religiously significant. She looked at the evidence, the reports of what the God of Israel had done, and she drew a conclusion, and then she acted on the conclusion before it was safe to do so. The writers of the New Testament look at this sequence and call it faith. Not the faith that arrives after certainty, the faith that moves before certainty, because the evidence is already sufficient, even if the outcome is not yet guaranteed. The question Rahab's story leaves is not comfortable. She betrayed her city. People died in Jericho, whose deaths were made more certain by the information the spies carried back to Joshua. The intelligence that the city's morale had collapsed, that the conquest could proceed, that the God of Israel had already given the land in the understanding of the people who lived there. She knew this when she made the agreement. She made it anyway. The text does not resolve this into a clean moral. It does not explain why the preservation of her family justified the information she provided, or whether it did. It does not offer a theological commentary on the ethics of wartime loyalty and betrayal. It records what she did. It records that she was brought out safely. It records that she lives among the Israelites. And then, centuries later, Matthew records her name in the genealogy. The text's silence on the moral complexity is not an oversight. It is the text doing what the text consistently does when human decisions are genuinely complicated, presenting the full record and leaving the reader in the weight of it. There is one detail in the story of Rahab that most readings pass over entirely, and it is the detail that in some ways carries the most weight. After she lowers the spies down through the window, the text records that she tied the scarlet cord in the window immediately. Not when the army arrived. Not on the 6th day of the marching. Not on the 7th morning when it would have been clear that something was finally happening. Immediately. The walls had not yet fallen. The army had not yet crossed the Jordan. There was no visible confirmation that the oath would be honored, that the scarlet cord would be recognized, that anyone would remember a rooftop agreement made with two men who were, at that moment, running for their lives through the darkness toward the hill country. She tied the cord in the window anyway, and left it there for 7 days while an army walked in silence around her city. Type the cord. If Rahab's decision to act before the outcome was visible landed differently than you expected. Type in the genealogy, if what Matthew does with her name, unchanged, unminimized, placed in the bloodline, is the part of this story that stays with you. Or type still outside the camp, because sometimes the position of being at the edge of a community, not yet fully inside, is where the most consequential decisions get made. The final story in this series follows a man who stood at the peak of his power, called fire from heaven, and then 3 days later sat under a tree and asked God to let him die. His name is Elijah, and the gap between the mountaintop and the tree is the part of his story that the Sunday school version has never been able to fully explain. Come back for it.